Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Marco Mariolini. Marco Mariolini was born on April 13, 1959, in the town of Brescia, Italy. His father worked as a builder, and his mother Mariolini was a housewife. She was obsessed with cleanliness and constantly tidied the house. Everything had to be in its place, and any mess could cause her to have a nervous breakdown. Marco had an older sister who was 2 years older. After Marco was born, his mother felt overwhelmed and struggled to keep the house clean. She suffered from emotional distress and may have suffered from obsessive-compulsive disorder, although she did not recognize her condition and never sought medical help. A month after Marco's birth, he was placed in the care of his paternal grandparents, where he lived for 2 years. His parents eventually brought him back home, believing their situation had improved and that they could handle the challenges of parenting. Once back home, Maria attempted to care for Marco, but he was very active and often caused trouble. He didn't listen to her and frequently threw tantrums. Frustrated, Maria sometimes lost her temper with him. Although Marco's father tried to step in during these conflicts, Maria dismissed his attempts. He is a calm and gentle man who always avoids conflicts with his wife to keep the peace. In the family of Marie, a serious incident occurred. Maria was trying to calm Marco, who was throwing another tantrum for no apparent reason and wouldn't stop. In a moment of frustration, she grabbed him and accidentally threw him out of an open window. Marco fell several floors and miraculously caught on the clotheslines located below, which saved his life. As Marco grew older, he gained weight. He didn't go on diets or actively try to lose weight, but he felt uncomfortable in his larger body. During his teenage years, he began to compare himself to his friends and felt disgusted by any girl who weighed more than he did. Additionally, Marco wanted his girlfriend to have a strong sex drive, equal to his own. However, finding someone who met these criteria was challenging. Most of the girls he met were either too heavy or not up to his standards. Because of this, Marco had a hard time finding a partner until he was 19, when he met Lucia. Marco and Lucia met in 1978. Lucia was short and weighed 100 pounds, and Marco fell in love with her petite figure and sought a close relationship. However, when Lucia first undressed in front of Marco, he was disappointed in her figure. Despite this, Marco continued to date her because he appreciated her calm, modest, and composed demeanor. Meanwhile, he continued to search for his ideal partner. A few months after starting their relationship, Marco joined the army and was stationed in Pisa, Italy. Believing that he would quickly find new love elsewhere, he stopped contacting Lucia. After a few months, when Lucia started dating someone new, Marco realized that he didn't want to lose her. He contacted her again and even proposed. Marco admitted that he decided to marry Lucia because he thought he could change her to fit his preferences. They got married in 1980, and soon after, Marco focused on controlling Lucia's weight. He believed that 45 kilograms was too heavy for a woman, so Lucia agreed to go on a diet. Marco restricted her food intake and weighed her regularly. When she lost weight, he praised her and expressed his love. However, if she gained weight, he became extremely harsh. After a few months, Lucia reached a dangerously low weight of 33 kilograms, which made Marco happy. Then, unexpectedly, Lucia became pregnant despite her low weight. Marco accepted this and allowed her to eat freely, he realizing that she shouldn't be restricted during her pregnancy. As Lucia's belly began to grow, Marco became unhappy with it. Their intimacy began to falter. During this time, Marco often fantasized about women who were very thin, like skeletons. He often fantasized about being able to see the woman's spine. As Lucia entered her final months of pregnancy, Marco began dating other women, especially those who were not only thin but also anorexic. However, He soon realized that these women were not right for him. Because they have unpleasant personalities and, most importantly, lack interest in intimacy. They make their own choices about food and eating, which is contrary to Marco's desire to have complete control over his diet. In 1981, Lucia gave birth to a daughter, and a year later, their family welcomed their second child. After giving birth, Lucia gained a significant amount of weight, causing Marco to increasingly distance himself from her. He found her post-pregnancy body unattractive. He eventually decided to divorce her, wanting to ensure that their children would stay with their mother. The divorce was amicable. Marco then began looking for a new partner, a journey that lasted nearly 10 years. During this time, he opened his own antique shop. In 1994, dating through newspaper ads began to become popular. Marco, 35, posted an ad describing who he was looking for. A very thin woman, not anorexic, aged 18 to 50. He received responses from 21 women and invited them on a date. Among them, he was most interested in Monica, who was from Sicily and 5 years younger than him. She was 1.72 meters tall and weighed 45 kilograms. She was friendly and outgoing. Curious about Marco's unusual ad, she decided to respond. Monica and Marco began to see each other regularly. While Monica viewed their relationship as casual, Marco wanted something more serious. He tried to convince her to move in with him. After a while, Monica decided to move in with Marco. In the same year, he started facing challenges at work. He had fallen into debt, and his antique shop was losing money. To help him, Monica lent him 76 million lira, the amount for which she sold the house. This was a large sum, considering that the average salary in Italy at that time was around 2 million lira. Although Marco proposed to Monica, she rejected him. At first, they lived as a normal couple, but after a while, Marco began to interfere with her diet. He said that a 1.72 m tall girl weighing only 33 kilograms was beautiful. But he set her goal weight at 38 kilograms. Monica agreed, Marco still secretly hoping she would reach 33 kilograms. It is unclear why he set that number. Marco limited Monica's meals to once a day, usually consisting of a plate of green salad or vegetables. He monitored the food in their house, marking the cereal jars and making sure Monica did not eat anything without his knowledge. He weighed her several times the day and became angry if he noticed her gaining a significant amount of weight. If her weight increased, he would force her to vomit and sometimes resort to physical violence. On weekends, the couple often eats out. Marco enjoys a hearty meal, ordering an appetizer, a second course, and a dessert. Monica, on the other hand, limits herself to a vegetable salad without dressing or unsweetened green tea. This is her routine, even on holidays. After a few months of dieting, she reached her goal weight, but soon after, her weight started to climb to 40 kilograms. Monica kept her diet a secret from everyone, including her parents and friends. As she began to lose weight, her relatives noticed and began to ask about her health. To avoid their questions, she changed the subject and eventually isolated herself, cutting off all contact with her friends and ignoring their calls. Over time, her health deteriorated. She felt weak, had no motivation to get out of bed, and her period stopped. Monica was constantly hungry and obsessed with food. She resorted to stealing, sneaking small dry crackers that Marco never counted. One day, she even ate a whole raw onion. When the Marco discovered that food was missing, he punished Monica severely. He forced her to have sex, physically abused her, and made her sleep on the floor. After 2 years of enduring this treatment, Monica felt completely drained. She finally made the decision to leave the house. When she told Marco that she wanted to end their relationship and return to her parents, he responded by saying that she would have to kill him for that to happen. He then threatened her with brutal revenge if she attempted to escape. In the spring of 1996, Marco and Monica went to a restaurant. Marco ordered a plate of spaghetti, while Monica chose a green salad and asked for no oil or seasoning. While they were waiting for their food, Marco said he needed to go to the bathroom. After Marco left the table, Monica suddenly took his plate of spaghetti and started eating it ravenously. When Marco returned from the restroom, he became extremely angry at Monica's actions. He snatched the plate from her hands and demanded that she calm down. In response, Monica rushed into the restaurant's kitchen, where the cooks and waitstaff were busy. She grabbed a plate of food and began eating with her hands. Marco found her there and brought her back to their table. He shouted at her and then slapped her hard across the face. The restaurant staff and other customers were puzzled and merely watched the chaotic scene in silence. After returning home, Marco decided to punish Monica. He stripped her and told her to sleep on the floor while he went to the bedroom to sleep comfortably in his warm bed. That night, Monica picked up a heavy hammer and attacked Marco while he was sleeping, hitting him on the head before fleeing the house. Hours later, Marco woke up with a severe headache and saw blood near him. Realizing that Monica was gone, he ran to his neighbor, who called an ambulance. Marco was taken to the hospital. Fortunately, he was not seriously injured and recovered fairly quickly. The police arrested Monica and took her into custody. During the interrogation, Marco defended Monica, acknowledging that he had been cruel to her. Marco said that there had been some misunderstandings in their relationship and that they would work things out. At trial, Monica was found guilty and sentenced to 2 years of house arrest. She then moved to her parents' home in Domodossola, a city in northern Italy, 200 kilometers away from Marco's home. During her house arrest, Monica was still able to use a phone. Although she never contacted Marco, he called her regularly. At first, he seemed concerned, showing concern for her well-being. However, over time, his calls became too frequent. During one conversation, Marco confessed that he could not live without her and wanted to see her again. Monica rejected his advances, but he persisted. In 1997, Marco wrote and published his first book, The Anorexia Hunter. The original cover photo that Marco chose featured a healthy, chubby man holding a skinny woman. He based the characters on the American cartoon Popeye the Sailor. However, due to copyright issues, Marco was unable to use the image, so the publisher released the book with a different cover. Marco has publicly stated that the book is an autobiography that reflects his real life. He expressed that he felt deprived of love and care since he was a child. He has a complicated relationship with his mother. Although he hates her, he sometimes feels affection for her. Marco describes his father as a weak and indecisive man. Marco wrote about his relationship with Lucia. In the book, he called Monica Barbara. He discussed the theme of control and power over girls. According to the story, the author killed Barbara. During the book's launch, Marco publicly declared himself a monster who needed to be stopped. An editorial writer who was present at the event found Marco's tone very offensive. After reading the book, the editorial writer went to the police to express his concerns. However, the police dismissed his report, believing that Barbara's murder was completely fictional. At the time, Marco had no criminal record, making it impossible to charge him based solely on the content of his book. When Marco's autobiography was released, Monica was still under house arrest for another year. Marco sent her a signed copy of his book with the message, "Love and Hate." He continued to call her, and Monica recorded their conversations on a dictaphone. Concerned about his mental health, she urged Marco to see a doctor. During his therapy sessions, Marco opened up about his obsessive thoughts and troubling fantasies, revealing the truth about his life. He was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for several weeks, but after his treatment, he returned home feeling disillusioned with medicine, realizing that the medication had not helped him. In 1998, Monica, who was 29 years old, was finally released from house arrest and allowed to travel around the country. Marco continued to contact her, pleading for a meeting. Although Monica initially refused, she realized that he wouldn't give up easily. Eventually, she agreed to one last meeting with him but specified her conditions. It had to be during the day in a crowded place. On July 14, 1998, Monica met Marco at a small beach in Verbania on the shores of Lake Maggiore, where young couples were swimming and sunbathing. They talked for a while, but then Marco began to pressure her to return to their previous relationship. Monica stood firm in her refusal, and in response, Marco started to threaten her. Monica and Marco were sitting on the shore when she suddenly stood up and ran away. Marco quickly caught up with her and knocked her to the ground. She screamed for help, but he covered her mouth with his hand. Although there were many witnesses, no one intervened. Marco then took out a knife and stabbed Monica 22 times, killing her on the spot. The witnesses called the police, but by the time the ambulance and police arrived, Marco had already swum out to sea. Officers using a lifeboat on the beach caught Marco. During questioning, Marco admitted to his crime, claiming that he had no intention of killing Monica. He said that he came to the beach hoping to convince her to return to the relationship. If she refused, he planned to kidnap her using his car parked nearby. Police found ropes, chains, knives, locks, and duct tape, suggesting a premeditated plan that ultimately failed. Marco denied wanting to run away after the murder. He mentioned that he tried to end his life but failed. During the investigation, comic book drawings were discovered in his home. In these drawings, he depicted himself as a large ball and the girl as a thin line. His artwork expressed mockery towards women. During his conversation with the journalist, Marco showed no remorse for his crime, stating that he felt he had no other option and did what he had to do. However, Marco acknowledged that he posed a danger to society. Marco Mariolini was found to be sane and guilty of murder, he receiving a 30-year prison sentence. While incarcerated, there was a time when he refused to eat, took laxatives, and lost weight down to 44 kilograms, but later he regained it. He was a problematic inmate, starting a fire in his cell and causing minor trouble for the guards. As a result, he was transferred to different prisons multiple times. Marco wrote letters claiming he should not be released because he would kill again, but he later denied this and then wrote similar letters once more. Italian director Matteo Rone was inspired by Marco's horror stories to create the film First Love. Released in 2004. Although it did not receive major awards, it drew attention to Marco's past. In 2021, there was an article written about Marco's early release and it was revealed that he had been transferred to a mental hospital. In late 2002, journalists approached Marco for an interview. During the interview, he expressed a desire to forget his past experiences with women. The journalists noticed that he seemed confused, often unable to answer their questions. His mental state may have been affected by the effects of medication. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Kathy Lamb. Kathy Lamb lived in an affluent area of Palm Beach. Kathy had a challenging childhood. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she lived with her father. During her teenage years, her mother was absent, which took a significant emotional toll on her. She was self-conscious about her weight, feeling larger than her peers. Fortunately, her stepmother was kind and supportive. Recognizing Kathy's insecurities, she helped her build her confidence, and over time, Kathy became more confident. She started playing sports and trying to lose weight. Kathy was very smart and kind, which helped her make friends in high school. She was active and cheerful, and her problems seemed to disappear when she was with her friends. One of those friends was Jeff. They met when he was 17 and she was 16, and they quickly felt a special connection. Their relationship continued even after they graduated. 2 years later, they secretly married, surprising their families. When their parents found out, they thought the couple was too young to make such a serious decision, but the couple was determined to stay together, despite family pressure. It seemed like the newlyweds had a bright future ahead of them. Jeff worked hard at a local repossessed car park, while Kathy found work as a pharmacist at a pharmacy. She had the necessary education and wanted to advance in the field. Over the years, Jeff remained a tow truck driver, while Kathy became a top pharmacist. A year later, she was offered a job as a district planner for distributing drugs to pharmacies, an opportunity she eagerly accepted. They achieved their dream of owning a home and enjoyed 12 happy years there until a devastating tragedy occurred. On June 15, 2004, Jeff returned home from work at around 7 p.m. He intended to invite his wife to dinner. However, as soon as he entered, he was horrified to see blood all over the hallway, running down the walls. The gruesome evidence of blood splatter and brain matter terrified him. As he called 911, he struggled to speak and held back tears. Initially, the operator mistook his cries for those of a woman, but Jeff eventually plucked up the courage to describe his home, which now looked like the set of a horror movie. At the end of the corridor, there was a significant amount of blood on one wall, as if it had been splattered. Facing this wall, about 1.5 meters away, similar splatters were visible on the opposite wall, and they extended down the stairs leading to the second floor. On the upper level, in the midst of the gruesome scene, lay 30-year-old Kathy, who was unresponsive. The operator attempted to guide Jeff over the phone to provide first aid, but Kathy's injuries were so severe that there was nothing that could be done. When the police arrived, they were taken aback by the horrific sight. It was one of the most brutal crime scenes they had ever encountered. Kathy's body showed multiple severe head injuries from heavy objects. Her skull and face were so badly damaged that they appeared completely disfigured. Although the murder weapon was not found at the scene, a thorough laboratory analysis determined that it was likely a long, heavy object with a hexagonal shape or similar features. Jeff mentioned that he had tried to call his wife several times after 5 p.m. but received no answer, which he found unusual. Concerned, he rushed home to meet her. It turned out that not only Kathy was injured, the couple had 3 large dogs in the house, Jeff's dog and his wife's 2 dogs. Tragically, both of his wife's pets were discovered badly beaten and lying on the floor next to their deceased owner. They had suffered severe head injuries and were barely alive. Unfortunately, the injuries were so extensive that the veterinarians had to euthanize the dogs to relieve their suffering. In a shocking turn of events, Jeff's dog was found locked in his owner's bedroom. Paws from all 3 dogs were found at the scene, along with blood that police believed did not come from the animals. They suspect the blood may have come from a struggle with the killer. The blood has been sent for analysis to determine its source and whether it can help the investigation, and they await the results. Police are uncertain whether the blood on the dogs came from Kathy or whether they fought with the attacker to protect her, resulting in their fatal injuries. Police found the dogs unharmed after the woman had been killed and the fight had begun. The amount of blood on the animals suggests that they had seriously injured the attacker, possibly lacerating an arm or leg. This means that the attacker would have bled profusely, possibly from an open wound, and that he would have sought medical attention at a hospital. The attacker's intentions remain unclear. He may have acted recklessly or out of a deep hatred for his victim, ignoring the large dogs that lived with the family. After examining the crime scene, the police still lacked any concrete leads. They had to wait for the autopsy results to gather more information. In the meantime, they checked all the local hospitals for the injured attacker. Several suspicious people came in with injuries that were found to be unrelated to the incident, as their injuries did not match those of a dog bite. The police began talking to local residents in the hope that someone had seen suspicious activity at Kathy's home or had noticed the criminal fleeing, possibly injured. Unfortunately, no one observed anything unusual. They were also trying to find a motive. Robbery seemed unlikely given the many valuables in the family's home. Only the gold earrings with diamonds that the Kathy was wearing during the attack were missing, while everything else remained untouched. Even the money, which was clearly visible, was not taken. It seems unlikely that a robber would ignore such an opportunity. There were no indications of a break-in, the furniture was undisturbed, drawers were not opened, and belongings were not scattered about, as thieves typically do when they search for valuables. This led the police to explore alternative motives and various theories. The forensic expert determined that the murder occurred between 4:30 p.m. and 5 p.m. Jeff, the first suspect who found the scene, had a strong alibi. At that time, he was on the job and was seen by numerous co-workers. Additionally, he showed no signs of injuries that would typically result from a struggle with the dogs. Just as police were about to clear Jeff of suspicion, an unknown young woman arrived at the family home. Joy Steele came to the house and introduced herself as Jeff's fiancée, which surprised the police, especially since Jeff had been crying earlier. The police found this an interesting case, as a man who had just lost his wife was being comforted by his mistress, with whom he had been in a serious relationship for a long time. This revelation made the case seem even more suspicious. 7 years into their relationship, Kathy discovered Jeff's infidelity. Despite this, they remained together and did not divorce. Kathy forgave him and even encouraged him to end the affair, leading to their reconciliation and continued life together just before the tragic incident. Police are considering whether a love triangle may have been a motive for the crime. Jeff had a strong motive for killing his troubled wife. That doesn't necessarily mean Jeff killed Kathy himself. He may have convinced someone else to do it. The police discovered a third dog locked in one of the rooms, which was unharmed. This was peculiar, especially given the serious injuries of the other 2 dogs belonging to the Kathy. Did the criminal truly hate her to the extent that he chose to ruin everything she cherished? The police needed to find answers to these questions. In the meantime, one of the police was questioning Jeff's mistress, Joy Steele, at the location of the incident. Joy shared her and Jeff's future plans. They planned to move away after a while Jeff planned to quit his job. Joy had a solid alibi. Joy, who was apparently working at a restaurant during the time of the murder, was present, and multiple people could confirm this. In addition, Joy had no injuries on her body. Although the suspicious couple could not have been directly involved in the murder due to their alibis and their lack of injuries, the police have not ruled them out as suspects given the serious circumstances surrounding the crime. They had a strong motive for their plan. The investigation into the crime and the hiring of the killer continues, with the police focusing on identifying potential enemies or those who may have wanted to harm Kathy. However, Kathy's friends and relatives have been unable to identify any enemies, with the exception of her husband. That same day, another suspect emerged. Jeff had another mistress named Lisa. A few weeks before the murder, Lisa's husband, Ray, discovered them together when he came home early from work and found Jeff shirtless on the couch. This confrontation led Ray to kick Jeff out of the house. The next day, Ray calls Lisa and threatens to kill Jeff if he continues with Lisa. Ray emerged as a potential suspect due to his violent nature and apparent motive. However, the situation raised questions about the Kathy. Why did Ray kill Jeff's wife? She had not harmed him and was actually the victim in the scenario, just like Ray. Despite this, Jeff continued to blame Ray. He believed that Ray had gone to the house to carry out his threat against Jeff, but Jeff was not home at the time. It is also possible that upon arriving at Jeff's house, Ray was in danger from Jeff's wife and dogs, so Ray felt compelled to kill her and the dogs. However, this motive does not fit with the extreme violence the killers showed towards Kathy. Her injuries were extremely brutal, suggesting that this was not a random crime, but an act of deep hatred. The police then turned their attention to Lisa, the second lover. Despite her husband's threats, she remained in contact with Jeff. Cell phone records confirmed that they frequently called and texted each other, including at the time of the Kathy's murder. Lisa and her husband Ray were both investigated, but they had solid alibis and were eliminated as suspects. However, the police decided to track the geolocation data of the lovers' mobile devices to gain more details. The call between Lisa and Jeff took place just minutes after the murder. Jeff's cell phone was found near his home, and Jeff was not at work at the time, contrary to what he had previously said. Additionally, Jeff's dog was unharmed, which seems more than just a coincidence. Forensic experts conducted a thorough examination of the animals. They collected DNA samples from the dog's muzzle and paws. Notably, the stains found on Jeff's dog were identified as palm prints. Blood samples taken from the scene were confirmed to belong to the Kathy, indicating that the perpetrator was in the hall with the dog after the attack on Kathy, during which she was injured or possibly killed. Police suspected that the killer's DNA might be on the animal's muzzles and paws. However, the investigation disproved this theory, revealing that the blood was not human, but believed to be from dogs that may have been fighting each other. By analyzing all the new information, police were able to piece together a clearer picture of the events that occurred on that tragic day. Someone entered the house and discovered Kathy along with her 3 large dogs. The attacker hit the woman in the head with a heavy object. 2 dogs were present, also seriously injured and later died. And they did not attack the attacker. They endured the blows without defending themselves. The 3rd dog also did not confront the attacker. Instead, the 3rd dog focused on protecting the other 2 dogs. This behavior aroused suspicion. The police consulted dog handlers for insights. Experts suggested that the dog's lack of resistance indicated they were familiar with the attacker and viewed him as a friend. This familiarity explained why they did not confront him but instead appeared to bite each other. Police found bite marks on the dogs, leading them to conclude that only Jeff, the owner of the surviving dog, could have attacked Kathy. Additionally, geolocation data indicated that the Jeff was near the house, which supported their suspicions. However, the Supreme Court only had circumstantial evidence, meaning they still had a long way to go before bringing any charges. The police needed one crucial piece of information to strengthen their case. With no further clues, the police focused on investigating Jeff's personal life, to understand what might have motivated Jeff to kill his wife. It turned out that the family had recently faced significant financial difficulties, which had affected Jeff for many years before these events. Jeff's boss caught him stealing a large sum of money, about $30,000. Jeff had not spent it all and agreed to return it. He also paid his boss $20,000 in restitution. The police then analyzed Jeff's activities. It turned out that his job brought in only a small income, just enough for his family's needs. He also spent money on his mistress. His wife's income was much higher, but he did not want to tell her about his problems. Jeff was characterized as someone without any remarkable business skills. He was neither particularly foolish nor exceptionally intelligent. His earnings were limited, making the compensation amount a serious financial burden for him. Despite living in an affluent neighborhood, he struggled to come up with the funds. Jeff sought ways to earn extra money or secure a loan, but all these efforts proved fruitless, and the total amount of compensation remained far beyond his reach. He later learned that he was the sole beneficiary of Kathy's life insurance policy, which was worth $29,000. Police believed that this amount of money could solve all of Jeff's financial problems. On the day of the incident, police collected the clothes he was wearing at the time. However, forensic experts conducted a quick test and found no blood or DNA from Kathy on his clothes. The suspect was wearing dark clothing, making it difficult to detect any blood stains. The experts meticulously studied every millimeter of the items using a microscope with 60,000 times magnification. Inside the jeans, they discovered several small red drops, which the forensic team identified as blood. This blood had seeped deep into the fabric fibers, suggesting that it was from high-velocity splashes. This evidence was consistent with the nature of the injuries sustained by the Kathy. DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Kathy. The police were further surprised when they examined Jeff's other belongings. They found a gold earring embedded with a diamond in one of his trouser pockets, which he had claimed was stolen during an attack. This indicated that he likely staged the scene and hesitated to dispose of the item to avoid being caught at a pawn shop. To strengthen their case in court, the police needed to find the murder weapon. Despite their best efforts, the police were unable to find the weapon. It took the prosecutor's office 2 months to establish a clear connection between the killer and the victim. During this time, an employee of the company where Jeff worked discovered a hexagonal crowbar on the roof of the building. The tool was standard equipment on the company's tow trucks and was available to all employees. What made the crowbar suspicious was the significant amount of blood found on it. The employee promptly notified the police of the discovery. Jeff claimed that he had lost his crowbar and was unable to provide it to the police. This raised suspicions that the bloody crowbar belonged to him and may have been hidden as the murder weapon. The crowbar was sent to a laboratory, where experts compared it to the injuries found on Kathy's head. They concluded that the shape of the tool matched the impact marks. Additionally, the blood found on the crowbar was confirmed to be Kathy's through analysis. Jeff was arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Friends knew he had often complained about his troubled marriage. He claimed that Kathy couldn't manage household chores, which made him angry. However, he overlooked that she was the one supporting the family financially and covering their travel expenses, leaving her little time for housework. Jeff's car was always cluttered with garbage, yet he continued to blame Kathy. He frequently talked to friends about wanting to end their relationship, and several acquaintances reported that he was considering divorce. Kathy was unhappy in her marriage to Jeff due to his betrayals and chaotic lifestyle, which she knew about. She often vented her frustrations to friends but couldn't bring herself to leave him because she loved him deeply. Despite her unhappiness, she stayed with Jeff, trying to tolerate his behavior. For Jeff, murder seemed like a better option than going through a divorce. He was in dire financial straits after stealing $30,000 at work, which had severely impacted his finances. If he divorced Kathy, they would have to divide their assets, and he risked losing their home. He felt he had nothing left to lose, as a divorce would leave him with little since Kathy could claim most of their assets. Jeff figured that by committing murder, he could use the life insurance payout to pay off his debts, keeping part of the money to start a new life with his mistress. Jeff had promised to make a choice between his 2 girlfriends, Lisa and Joy, but the decision remained a secret. During the investigation, police uncovered more details about the crime. On the day it happened, Jeff left for work but had actually planned to kill his wife. He drove a tow truck to a gas station, pretending he needed to fill it up. His absence from work was noted, and during that time, he returned home to wait for his wife to return. He was familiar with her daily routine, so he did not have to wait long. In a shocking turn of events, Jeff brutally killed his wife's dogs with a crowbar. The dogs, confused and frightened, began to fight. To stop the chaos, Jeff hit each dog on the head and then took his pet, Netarunu, into a room and locked the door. After the incident, he removed his wife's diamond earrings, intending to make it look like a robbery. He discarded some of his clothes, taking off his shirt and shoes, but he kept the jeans he wore during the massacre, likely overlooking the bloodstains on them. This oversight allowed forensic experts to find tiny drops of blood on the jeans, linking him to the crime. His lover called him while he was near his home, which revealed his location on the phone. When he arrived at the station, he attempted to dispose of the crowbar used in the attack, but did so carelessly, simply throwing it onto the roof of a utility building and not washing it. He believed the tool would never be discovered. Jeff was convicted of premeditated murder due to financial difficulties he thought he could overcome by collecting life insurance from his wife's death. Prosecutors presented substantial evidence linking him to the crime scene, the murder weapon, and the victim. His fingerprints were found on the crowbar, along with Kathy's blood on his clothing. He had attempted to stage a robbery and failed to completely conceal the earrings that were believed to have been stolen. Several people testified about domestic problems. Kathy still hoped to reconcile with her husband, despite being devastated by his betrayal. She truly loved him and was undaunted by his financial difficulties. What she craved most was love and understanding. Unfortunately, Jeff did not want to rekindle their relationship. Instead, he planned a murder that he believed would net him $29,000. It is suspected that Joy, one of Jeff's lovers, knew of his intentions. Jeff promised her a future together, on the condition that she pay off the debt he would incur from his crimes. During the hearing, the defense attempted to portray Jeff as a model husband and a good person, but no witness could reliably substantiate this claim. Jeff had never been a hard worker and showed little interest in his work. He had no motivation to do anything else and did not have a positive reputation in his family life. He was not a good husband, as he had a history of infidelity that his late wife knew about. His lifestyle was well known to friends and family. But it was his wife who suffered the most. When Jeff's efforts to build a better image failed, his attorney changed tactics. He began looking for weaknesses in the prosecution's case. However, the prosecution's strategy was well rehearsed and backed by substantial evidence, leaving little room for debate. The defense argued that Jeff was not the only possible suspect in Kathy's murder, claiming that the police had focused too quickly on him without fully exploring other potential suspects. In fact, police and the prosecutor's office had interviewed dozens of people and considered multiple suspects. Each suspect was thoroughly questioned, allowing police to eliminate those who did not fit the evidence. The prosecution argued that the attacker had two motives. First, he hoped to solve his financial problems through a life insurance policy. Second, he wanted to get rid of his troubled wife so he could live with one of his mistresses. Additionally, he sought to avoid the risk of losing his assets or having to divide his assets in a divorce. The prosecution also argued that Jeff's mistress, Lisa, knew about his plans. She supported him and was waiting for the call to hear about the progress of the crime. Her indiscretion led her to call Jeff, which provided the police with a vital clue. Investigations were conducted to determine whether the mistresses were involved in planning or organizing the crime, but the results were negative. However, it is clear that they supported the Jeff, even though they should have reported his bad intentions to the police to prevent the murder. Ultimately, no evidence was found to prove the lovers' guilt or involvement, so they faced no consequences in court. In September 2006, Jeff Lamb was convicted of premeditated murder and sentenced to life without parole. As the verdict was read, Lisa wept uncontrollably in court. Kathy's family believes the court's ruling was fair. In Kathy's mother's opinion, Jeff should rot behind bars for the rest of his life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of McDonald family. Jeffrey McDonald was born on October 12, 1943, in New York, USA. He was a well-known figure in his youth, serving as the quarterback for his high school football team and being very popular among his peers. After graduating from Princeton, Jeffrey attended medical school and completed an internship at a prestigious medical center in New York. He married Colette Stevenson, a high school acquaintance. Shortly after their wedding, they welcomed their daughter Kimberly, and 3 years later, their son Kristen was born. After completing his education, Jeffrey joined the Army and was later accepted into the elite Green Berets. In the next 2 years, Jeffrey was assigned to the Fort Bragg military base in North Carolina. After a period of frequent relocations, their life finally became stable. They settled in the nearby city of Fayetteville and lived in a house provided by the state. Jeffrey returned home from work at 6 p.m. and no longer had to go on business trips, which allowed Colette to feel more at ease. She hoped that once Jeffrey completed his service in a few years, they could move to their own farmhouse, away from the city's hustle and bustle. At the time of the tragedy, Colette was pregnant with their third child, and everything seemed perfect. Their love story tragically turned into one of the most horrific crime episodes in U.S. history. At approximately 3:30 a.m. on February 17, 1970, the operator of the Fayetteville Rescue Service received a call from a man identifying himself as Captain Jeffrey McDonald. He reported that a violent attack had taken place in his home, stating that his wife had been stabbed to death and possibly raped. He was unclear about the fate of his children and urged for immediate assistance. The dispatcher quickly dispatched a police car to the scene. As the police were heading to the house, they saw a strange woman standing in the rain at 3:55 a.m., wearing a wide-brimmed hat. She was doing nothing and appeared to be waiting for something. However, the officers didn't have time to investigate further, so they drove past her. A few minutes later, they arrived at the Jeffrey family home, where the police entered through the back door because the lights inside were off. In the first room, officers discovered the body of a woman lying on the floor, showing no signs of life. She was covered in blood, and her position suggested she may have been raped. Her face was severely disfigured. She lay on her back next to her injured husband. As the first officer approached, Jeffrey urgently inquired about the fate of his children, whom he had heard screaming but could not get to. Another police officer searched the other rooms and found a brutal scene in the children's bedroom, where they discovered the mutilated head of 5-year-old Kimberly, with her neck and upper body also bearing multiple stab wounds. In another room, 2-year-old Kristen lay on the bed, suffering from multiple injuries to his back and chest. Jeffrey was in serious condition, having been stabbed in the head and upper chest. At one point, he lost consciousness, but a police officer was able to revive him to gather information about the incident. Jeffrey reported that 3 men and 1 woman had broken into the house. He suspected they were hippies, noting that one of the men was dark-skinned and wore a jacket with a sergeant's insignia. He also described a suspicious woman in a hat whom the police had encountered earlier, but unfortunately, it was too late to find her that night. Jeffrey was the only survivor of the attack that night, while the others sadly did not make it. He received first aid to treat his wounds, including a serious lung injury, and was given a sedative. Once stabilized, police spoke with him about the incident. He recounted that he and his wife had shared a glass of orange juice mixed with alcohol that evening. Since their daughter was sleeping, he decided to sleep on the couch in the living room. Jeffrey falls asleep in front of the TV but suddenly wakes up to intense pain. He is being attacked by 3 unidentified assailants. A woman in a hat stands to one side, holding a flashlight or candle, watching the attack. Jeffrey thinks the attackers look like hippies on drugs. The woman gives orders to the men. Chaos then erupts, and Jeffrey loses consciousness. When he regains consciousness, he finds his wife unresponsive. He tries to give her first aid, but to no avail. Desperate to get to his children, he finds himself unable to move due to his injuries, so he calls 911. The Army Criminal Investigation Department sent the most inexperienced police staff to the scene. After examining the area, he he concluded that Jeffrey's story was not true. The officer found the story of Jeffrey with the hippies unlikely. He found no evidence that others were present. After this decision, the investigation shifted its focus to proving Jeffrey's guilt. The head of the McDonald family was arrested and Jeffrey was charged with 3 counts of criminal conspiracy. The case quickly turned into a disaster. From the outset, Jeffrey's defense attorneys aimed to assess the professionalism of the police during the search of the house. Through cross-examination, it was discovered that numerous violations had occurred. The procedures used had compromised the integrity of the evidence and the crime scene. The area had been essentially trampled, making it extremely difficult to identify any traces left by the criminals. This situation allowed the defense to argue that the prosecution's conclusion about Jeffrey's involvement in the crimes was incorrect, and that the killers were strangers, hippies. Jeffrey was a devoted family man, a caring father and husband, and a respected professional. As a result, he had many supporters, including colleagues who believed in his innocence. They felt there was no motive for the murder and found it hard to believe he would harm himself just to fake a near-death experience. His grandfather, Freddie Cassap, was so upset that he started a nationwide campaign to prove Jeffrey's innocence. Meanwhile, an article criticized the military justice system for holding closed hearings that excluded the public and the media. The situation did not improve. The trial remained hidden from public view, with more evidence later presented to the Supreme Court highlighting police incompetence. The investigation was sloppy. The ambulance driver tampered with evidence at the scene and even stole Jeffrey's wallet while police were present. An army doctor compromised crucial evidence, including hair samples needed for comparison. Fingerprints were mixed up with various items such as a phone and a baby bottle. Most of the people involved in the investigation were inexperienced and unprofessional. The number of violations identified continued to grow with each minute of questioning. The investigation received an unexpected tip about a young woman seen on the street in the rain, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Her name was Helena Stokely. Helena was the daughter of a retired Army officer and had a troubled connection with the criminal world. While she was a police informant, she was also deeply involved in the hippie culture and had been selling illegal substances for many years. The police interviewed Helena and obtained valuable information about her associates. However, serious mistakes occurred during the interrogation. Notably, the police failed to record the conversation, which was necessary for presenting evidence in court. The inexperienced police claimed that the investigation into Helena's involvement was still ongoing. However, the situation worsened so much that the police simply did not know where she was. She fled when everyone realized the full scale of the incompetence that was committed during the Army investigation. The investigation must start all over again on all issues. Despite this, the military leadership still kept the hearing closed to the media. Meanwhile, one police officer chose to share information with journalists about the mistakes made by the Army Commission of the Armed Forces. This angered the military leadership even more. While everyone else believed he was innocent, the military commission refused to acknowledge their own incompetence. Unfortunately, they held significant power and were unwilling to back down. They asserted that, although there was no clear motive for the crime, Jeffrey might have used substances that could provoke aggression and potentially lead to murder. Contrary to the prosecution's allegations, witnesses began to testify that Jeffrey was a loving husband and father. The defense presented a large body of evidence in support of this view. Furthermore, at the time of the massacre, Jeffrey was in a stable mental state. Only a small amount of alcohol was found in his system, which would not have significantly impaired his judgment or led him to commit such violent acts. Along with friends and family who testified, qualified experts, including a psychiatrist, evaluated Jeffrey and concluded that he was sane and had no homicidal tendencies toward his family. Even the civil police believed that Jeffrey was innocent due to the lack of evidence against him. His mother had to sell their house to afford legal fees. Ultimately, he was cleared of charges due to insufficient evidence. However, this did not stop the Army Commission from reopening the investigation later on. The military police promised to persist in their efforts to convict Captain Jeffrey MacDonald, regardless of the previous investigation's flaws. They believed that their earlier mistakes did not rule out the possibility of Jeffrey's guilt. The situation was not serious and did not significantly affect the outcome. Jeffrey resigned from the U.S. Army. Disillusioned with the military, he began a campaign to expose the armed forces through the media. However, he was unaware of the powerful enemies he was facing and the dangers that would be placed upon him. Meanwhile, the police found Helena Stokely. She claimed to have witnessed the murder of the MacDonald family, allegedly committed by her friends. Helena was willing to testify in court, hoping to be granted immunity from prosecution. Her testimony was verified through a lie detector test. Despite this, the military leadership refused to consider any other suspects, focusing solely on Jeffrey and preparing to charge him again. In the summer of 1971, Jeffrey and a friend moved to Long Beach, California, in search of a fresh start. Initially not realizing that a conspiracy was brewing against him, they both found jobs in the emergency department of a medical center, where their efforts helped make it the best department in the entire facility. Jeffrey's skills were highly regarded, leading to his work being published in medical journals. He also became an advocate for children's rights, fighting against child abuse. The military prosecutor's office continued to reopen the case, and on the grounds that they had obtained Jeffrey's psychiatric reports, he was charged again. The trial was scheduled for mid-1979 and a smear campaign began. It was a high-profile case, and from the start, the armed forces were formed to fight Jeffries. And at that time, people from the highest echelons of power rallied against Jeffrey, a former Army captain. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Blackburn wanted to use the case as a springboard for his career. He was later convicted of forgery, fraud, and embezzlement. But at the time of the triple murder retrial, Jeffrey's reputation was impeccable. The assistant prosecutor had concealed evidence that proved Jeffrey's innocence. And the Attorney General was not even allowed to conduct his own independent examination of the evidence collected or review the case file. It was clear that the judge was biased toward the prosecution, which affected the outcome of the trial. Any evidence that could have proven that Jeffrey innocent was not presented to the jury or provided to Jeffrey's attorney. For example, the victim was found holding 5 strands of light-colored hair. The prosecution claimed that these hairs came from a doll owned by the victim's daughter. However, they actually belonged to Helena Stokely, who was wearing a light-colored wig that she removed shortly after the murder. Additionally, a hair belonging to Jeffrey was found in the victim's hand, but since he lived there, this was not unusual and could have been a coincidence. This evidence did not prove Jeffrey's guilt. The skin particles found under Kimberly and Kristen's fingernails were not their father's and were identified as belonging to the attackers. However, the particles were never analyzed and eventually disappeared. This evidence, along with much else that could have proven Jeffrey's innocence, was deliberately ignored at trial. A key part of the prosecution's case was the pajama fibers found on the chisel believed to have been used to kill Jeffrey's children. The prosecution claimed the chisel was the weapon used and contained particles from the clothing Jeffrey was wearing when police found him on the night of the triple murder. Years later, it was discovered that these claims were false. Police found several black fibers on the chisel that matched those found on the bodies of Kristen and Kimberly. However, these fibers did not match any of the clothing from the MacDonald's home. Additionally, wax droplets were found at the crime scene that did not match any of the candles from the victims' homes. These wax droplets were actually used by Helena Stokely in her rituals. Helena claimed to be a witch and practiced magic, which became a key factor in the case. The prosecution made a strong claim that fibers from Jeffrey's pajamas were found in Colette's hair. However, this claim was later proven to be false. The defense attorney, Jeffrey, was unable to object to this assertion at the hearing because it had never been mentioned before. There were also other false pieces of evidence, including claims of bloody marks on the couple's bed sheets, which the prosecution argued indicated that the husband had dragged his wife's body. It was later revealed that these bloody marks did not exist. Furthermore, the prosecution was unaware of important information at the hearing. Specifically, the prosecution was unaware that Helena Stokely had contacted the FBI in 1978, claiming that she was involved in a triple homicide while she was being treated for depression and had attempted to end her life in the hospital. During the trial, Helena said that on the day of the massacre, she was with her boyfriend Greg Mitchell and some soldiers from Fort Braga. They were all using drugs, and according to her, they lost control. Helena mentioned that she called the McDonald family's house late at night to check if everyone was home, but she couldn't remember what happened afterward. The military police then approached her, and she felt so intimidated that during the second trial, she was unable to recount events between midnight and 5 a.m. However, she did acknowledge having a hat and a light wig, which were later destroyed because they could potentially serve as evidence against her. At trial, Helena claimed she had been present at the massacre, holding a candle and muttering strange incantations. However, she maintained that she had not harmed any of the McDonald family. She felt sick when her friends were near the children, prompting her to flee the house. It is thought that the murders were not random. Helena's friends may have been motivated by revenge. The soldiers were angry that Dr. Jeffrey had refused to give them illegal substances. Helena passed a polygraph test 3 times, and her statements were validated. Despite this, her testimony was deemed unreliable. The judge imposed restrictions on providing information about Helena and her soldier friends, which became one of the obstacles for Jeffrey's defense. The defense relied on the psychological profile and personal qualities of the accused to convince the jury of his inability to commit murder. The judge allowed the use of previously collected data, but only if Jeffrey underwent another examination by a psychiatrist. This request was of course a trap, as the psychiatrist had been cooperating with the military for 8 years while the investigation was ongoing. The prosecutor's office, eager to put Jeffrey behind bars for good, asked the doctor to make a finding. After a brief interrogation, the doctor declared Jeffrey a psychopathic murderer. Ultimately, the court refused to allow the use of Jeffrey's previous psychiatric records, which had been obtained from another psychiatrist. Instead, the jury was presented with the new psychiatrist's report, which had a devastating effect on the defense. The prosecution replaced Jeffrey's rosy image with that of a true monster. The jury found Jeffrey McDonald guilty of murdering his wife, Colette, and their 2 children, Kimberly and Kristen. Sentenced him to 3 life terms. Even with this, the revenge of the military police leadership was not over. After learning that Fort Braga soldiers had a serious problem with illegal substances, the unit's leadership was unprepared for such problems, which coincided with the emergence of the burgeoning hippie movement. Under Jeffrey, the situation became more difficult for the soldiers to access, which made them unhappy. Later, some gathered to go to Jeffrey's house to take revenge. Helena's guilt was unquestionable. Even her husband, whom she married in the 80s, believed she was involved. He thought she hadn't committed murder but was likely a witnessed the incident. Helena shared many details about the crime scene that had never been made public at the time. The girl was present in McDonald's house on that fateful night, and this is well established. She underwent 3 polygraph tests, all supporting her account of being there. Her testimony was also recorded on video. According to her, when they entered the house, they forced Jeffrey to write a prescription for Zach, which led to a fight that resulted in the murder of Jeffrey's family members. Jeffrey was left alive, turned into a martyr. The criminals wrote "Death to all pigs" on the wall, likely trying to imitate Charles Manson, who was widely known at that time. Helena passed away at the age of 30 due to complications from liver disease. This incident occurred in 1970, and Helena's testimony was recorded with the judge's approval. At the time of the triple murder, her boyfriend, Greg Michel, was a soldier struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder after returning from Vietnam. As a result, he started using drugs heavily and had to enter treatment once more due to his addiction. He later admitted to a friend that he was involved in the MacDonald family's murder. At the crime scene, several pieces of evidence were collected, including Greg's blood and hair samples. It was noted that he was left-handed, and an independent expert determined that the knife wounds were likely made with the left hand. Additionally, he had liver issues, which prevented him from testifying during the trial. Jeffrey MacDonald's fatal mistake was befriending writer Joe McGinnis. They met just before his retrial, and Jeffrey asked Joe to write a book about his case. Jeffrey believed this would give him an advantage in the upcoming hearings. Jeffrey then allowed Joe to attend all of the meetings in detail. In return, Jeffrey received a portion of the book's advance from the publisher and agreed not to contest the book's contents. The friendship between the two men grew stronger. Joe supported Jeffrey and convinced him that Joe was still defending Jeffrey's innocence. However, Joe eventually betrayed Jeffrey by portraying him as the true monster in his book. From private conversations, Joe discovered that just before the triple murder, Jeffrey had taken diet pills, which were quite strong at that time. Although this was an isolated incident, Joe exaggerated the situation, suggesting that Jeffrey was taking 3 pills daily, which could have led to a serious overdose. Joe claimed this was the cause of Jeffrey's anger and violent behavior towards his family. He even pointed to a specific incident: Jeffrey's daughter had wet his side of the bed. In a normal family, the father would not react angrily to such an incident, but Joe saw it as the reason why Jeffrey, the man who was supposed to love his family, lost control. Joe believed that, under the influence of drugs, he had gone psychotic and ended up killing an entire family. However, a toxicology test found no drugs in Jeffrey's system, only a small amount of alcohol. During the trial, Joe said he had changed his mind about Jeffrey's guilt, believing it was more financially beneficial to Jeffrey. The controversial book did significant damage to Jeffrey's reputation. As a result, support for Jeffrey's innocence dwindled. However, Jeffrey successfully sued the book's author for libel. In August 1980, Jeffrey filed a lawsuit seeking millions in damages. After several hearings, the court awarded him $325,000. While most of the compensation was placed in a trust, Jeffrey retained the right to continue his fight for justice against the author. Jeffrey's story resonated with many people. Several well-known lawyers believed in his innocence and volunteered their services to help secure his acquittal. Despite their efforts, numerous appeals were rejected in 1989. However, during the trial and the review of the court's decision, new evidence emerged that supported Jeffrey's claim of non-involvement in the triple murder, including results from examinations. Unfortunately, the same judge presided over the proceedings. This judge continued to hinder the defense team, demonstrating a lack of impartiality throughout the case. A significant breakthrough during this time was the advent of new DNA testing technologies that allowed Jeffrey's defense team to conduct their own analyses. Sadly, at this stage, the judge repeatedly obstructed the lawyers' efforts to seek justice. Information about Helena Stokely finally emerged. A video of her testimony was made available to the lawyers. By this point, Jeffrey, the wrongfully convicted man, had spent 20 years in prison but had never stopped fighting for his freedom. Meanwhile, the military prosecutor's office continued to resist, attempting to dispute all the new evidence. Additional witnesses were found, some of whom had been intimidated and coerced into supporting the prosecution. Stokely, the McDonald family's nanny, admitted to the prosecution that she had been at the McDonald's home during the murders. She also revealed that the prosecution had threatened to prosecute her if she testified in court, which discouraged her from speaking out. Prosecutor Blackburn was eventually convicted of several charges, including forgery, theft, and embezzlement, and was remanded in custody in January 2006. New evidence came to light, suggesting a possible retrial. First, a videotaped confession by Helena Stokely was made public, followed by the release of evidence supporting Stokely's claim. DNA testing showed that hair and tissue found on the victim did not match anyone known and belonged to a stranger. In March 2006, a man came forward to the police, claiming that he had been drinking regularly at a bar with a man who had confessed to the McDonald murders. This man turned out to be Lena's boyfriend, Greg Mitchell. The last time he had heard details of the case was a few weeks before Greg's death. The cashier at the store near the house, Jeffrey, claimed that he saw a group of hippies enter the store the morning after the murders. They looked unkempt, were covered in blood, and were talking to each other about the crime they had committed. However, they then threatened him with his life. The cashier recognized Greg and Helena among this group. An employee at the rehabilitation center where Greg Mitchell was treated also claimed that he had repeatedly confessed to her that he had killed the Jeffrey McDonald's wife and children, even writing his initials on the wall of the center. Unfortunately, all of this evidence was ignored by the court. 54 years have passed since the tragic murder of the McDonald family. Defenders at the Supreme Court are still trying to prove Jeffrey's innocence by filing appeals. His most recent appeal against his conviction was in 2021, but was dismissed. Jeffrey remains in prison but still holds out hope that he will one day be free again. While in prison, he met Catherine, an activist involved in the Innocence movement, and they developed a relationship. She visited him regularly and eventually married. Catherine runs a website dedicated to Jeffrey's case, working to secure his release. The 80-year-old, who has spent most of his life in prison, argues that those who actually committed the crime are still walking free. Many of those responsible have lived their entire lives without facing justice, and some have even died without being held accountable for their actions. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Jason Corbett. Jason Corbett, a 39-year-old Irish businessman, Jason has a warm, friendly personality. Born in Limerick, Ireland, Jason has a twin brother named Wayne and an older sister named Tracy. He married Margaret Fitzpatrick in 2003 when he was 27. They later welcomed 2 children, a son named Jack and a daughter named Sarah, whom they loved dearly. Jason's family seemed to be living a happy life in Ireland, but this happiness was short-lived. Tragedy struck in 2006, shortly after Sarah was born. Margaret suffered a severe asthma attack one night, waking Jason up because she was having trouble breathing. Jason immediately tried to help her by giving her medication and using her inhaler, but her condition quickly worsened. In a panic, Jason called an ambulance, but unfortunately, Margaret died on the way to the hospital. Jason Corbett was the director of a small packaging company in Ireland when he lost his wife, leaving him to raise his 2-year-old son and 3-month-old daughter alone. His friends witnessed his deep sadness and struggled to cope with the loss. A year after his wife's death, Jason was looking for a nanny and housekeeper to care for his children. This led him to Molly Martins, a 25-year-old American woman. In March 2008, Molly moved from the United States to Ireland to take up a nanny job. A friend of Jason's accompanied him to the airport to pick Molly up. The friend immediately became concerned that Molly might not be suitable for the job. Molly's youthful appearance, flashy style, and heavy makeup aroused suspicion. With her bright jacket, cowboy boots, curly hair, and heavy makeup, Molly looks more like a stage performer than a responsible nanny and maid. Molly was born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee. After attending Clemson University for a while, she dropped out and decided to start a new life in Ireland. There, she worked as a nanny for Jason's family, taking care of his two children, Jack and Sarah. Molly immediately took to the children, showing them care and concern. Jason's friends noticed a significant change in him. He seemed to be coming back to life after a period of grief. As Molly and Jason's relationship deepened, love blossomed and they began dating. The family of four went on vacations together, which brought them closer together. They began to plan for their future as a family. 2 years later, on Valentine's Day 2010, Jason took Molly to a coffee shop, where he proposed to her with a ring. Overjoyed, Molly immediately began planning their wedding in the United States. She also convinced Jason to leave Ireland and move to the United States with her, and he agreed. In 2011, Jason sold his house, moved to the United States for work, and the family settled in Davidson County, North Carolina. The couple married in a beautiful ceremony attended by friends and family from both the United States and Ireland. After the wedding, Molly worked as a swimming instructor. But her main focus was raising Jack and Sarah. Jason, on the other hand, worked as a manager in the United States. At first, their life seemed perfect, but as time went on, their marriage began to fall apart. On August 1, 2015, Molly's parents, Tom and Sharon Martins, visited Jason's family home, where he greeted them at the entrance and helped them with their luggage. Tom had brought a gift for Jason's son, Jack, a baseball bat, but Jack was out with friends at the time. Instead, Jason, Molly, her parents, and Sarah had dinner together, eating pizza. Jack returned home late that night, but Tom decided to wait until the next morning to give him the baseball bat. After 11 p.m., the family went to bed. Molly and Jason were in the master bedroom on the first floor, while their children, Jack and Sarah, were in nearby rooms. Molly's parents were upstairs in the living room. Hours later, at 3 a.m., Molly's father, Tom, called 911 in a panic. He claimed that Jason had attacked his daughter, Molly, and in response, Tom had hit Jason with a baseball bat. Jason was now unconscious and bleeding. During the call, Tom expressed his fear that Jason's severe head injuries could be fatal and urgently requested an ambulance to their location. Tom asked the 911 operator for help, and she instructed Tom and Molly to perform CPR to try to revive Jason until paramedics arrived. When the police and ambulance arrived, they found Molly in the yard near a car, looking distressed and shocked but not crying. Inside the house, they discovered Jason Corbett's body in the master bedroom, surrounded by blood splattered on the bed, walls, and floor. Tom and Molly both had blood on their clothes. A baseball bat and a large pebble with blood on them were found near Jason, along with an overturned lamp. Jack and Sarah had been sleeping in their room during the incident. At the police station, Tom Martins, 66, a 30-year veteran of the FBI, stated that his son-in-law was mentally unstable and had been abusing his daughter. According to Tom, Jason had been drunk that night. Everyone had gone to bed, but Tom was awakened in the middle of the night by screams and loud voices coming from downstairs. He quickly got out of bed, grabbed a baseball bat, and ran down the stairs. When Tom entered the master bedroom, he found Jason strangling Molly with both hands. Tom yelled, "Let her go." In response, Jason turned to him and said, "I'm going to kill her." Tom and Molly did not deny their involvement in Jason's death but claimed they had acted in self-defense. Tom immediately felt the need to protect himself and those around him. He swung the baseball bat at Jason, but the blow seemed to have no effect. When Jason tried to drag Molly into the bathroom, Tom intervened, trying to stop him. The situation worsened when Jason pushed Tom, causing him to fall and his glasses to fly off. At this point, Tom felt his life was in danger. Jason then spotted the baseball bat on the floor and reached for it. Molly quickly responded by grabbing a rock and hitting Jason in the head, yelling, "Don't touch my dad," as she did so. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Tom picked up the baseball bat and repeatedly hit Jason until he fell to the floor. Molly, 32, provided a consistent account of events during her interview. She explained that her daughter Sarah woke up with a nightmare that night, which caused Jason to become angry and attack her. Jason allegedly began strangling Molly, threatening to kill her, and her father intervened to protect her. In order to protect her father, Molly claimed to have hit Jason on the head with a heavy rock. When asked where she got the rock, Molly replied that she had placed it on her bedside table. The rock had originally been used for drawing pictures with children as part of a gardening project, but Molly could not remember exactly how many times she had hit Jason, describing the incident as a desperate fight for her life. During her interview, Molly told police that she was still in pain from the alleged strangling incident. Photos of Molly, which showed a red mark in the middle of her neck, were compared to photos taken of her when she was arrested. However, the comparison did not reveal any red marks on her neck at the time of her arrest. Molly later admitted that the fight with her husband had actually occurred the day before the tragedy, in which Jason had grabbed her arm and neck. During questioning, she repeatedly complained of a sore throat. Both Molly and her father, Tom, testified that Jason had abused his wife, but Jason's family disputed these claims. Jason's sister, Tracy, noticed that Molly was controlling of Jason, often becoming upset if things did not go her way. She also noticed that Molly did not want to socialize with Jason's family members when they visited. Additionally, one of Molly's friends shared a disturbing claim that Molly had claimed to be friends with Jason's first wife, Margaret, until her death. However, this contradicted the family's account, as they knew Margaret had died of an asthma attack, not cancer. Despite Jason's relatives' warnings and attempts to intervene about Molly's unusual behavior, the wedding still takes place, marking the beginning of a complicated and troubled marriage. Over time, Molly's behavior began to raise concerns. Jason noticed a major change in her personality and suspected that she might have mental health issues. She was initially kind and loving, but now seemed manipulative and controlling. This worried Jason and led to more problems in their relationship. Molly began distancing herself from Jason's family by cutting her phone calls to just seconds. Before her death, Jason took steps to protect his children, Jack and Sarah. He named his sister, Tracy, as their legal guardian in case anything happened to him. Tracy knew that if Jason died, Molly would have custody of the children. After Jason's death, Tracy traveled to North Carolina to file for custody, preparing for a legal battle with Molly. During her troubled marriage to Jason, Molly consulted with an attorney to understand her rights to Jason's children in the event of a divorce. The lawyer suggested that she record their arguments and gather evidence that could be used against Jason. As a result, Molly began secretly recording their conversations. In these recordings, Molly appeared unresponsive, often ignoring Jason's repeated questions as his voice grew louder. After Jason's death, Molly confided in a close friend about her marital problems, describing Jason as controlling and abusive. She accused him of forcing her to have sex, verbally abusing her, and becoming increasingly aggressive toward her over time. Despite this, Molly never reported Jason's behavior to the police. For days after Jason's death, his 10-year-old son Jack and 8-year-old daughter Sarah were interviewed by a child welfare specialist. During the conversation, they shared their thoughts about their parents' relationship. The children described seeing their mother, Molly, being careful not to wake their father, Jason, for fear of him getting angry. Jack described a pebble on his parents' bedside table, explaining that they had brought it in because it was raining and planned to decorate it later. Both Jack and Sarah described witnessing arguments between them. According to the children, their father, Jason, often initiated these arguments, which included hitting, pushing, and swearing at his mother, Molly, over trivial matters. Jason's autopsy report found that he died of traumatic brain injury. He had suffered approximately 12 severe blows to the head with a baseball bat and a rock, all concentrated in the same area. The injuries were so severe that his scalp was torn away from his skull and his skull was fractured. A toxicology report found that Jason's blood alcohol level was slightly higher than normal at the time of his death. He also had traces of trazodone, an antidepressant commonly prescribed to treat insomnia, in his body. Jason was buried in his hometown of Limerick, Ireland, next to his first wife, Margaret. After Jason's death, his sister, Tracy, took their children, Jack and Sarah, to Ireland, which left Molly shocked and heartbroken. She tried to contact Jack and Sarah by phone and social media. Molly and Tom claimed they acted in self-defense against Jason, but the investigation into his death continues. Tracy has another theory. She thinks Molly killed Jason because he planned to leave her and take their children. Tracy believes that Jason told Molly about his decision on the night of the incident, and Molly, afraid of being alone, reacted violently. In Ireland, Jack and Sarah slowly adjust to their new lives. 9 months after their father's death, they revealed that they were forced to lie about domestic violence. They admit that Molly made up stories about their father's violent behavior, threatening to cut them off if they did not comply. The children clarify that their father had never abused Molly, contrary to what they had initially said. During the investigation, Molly's past relationship with her ex-husband Keith Megan came to light. Keith shared some revealing details about Molly's past. The two met on a dating website and quickly fell in love, moving in together just 6 weeks later. Keith described Molly as independent, fun-loving, carefree and unconventional. However, she eventually confided in him about her struggles with bipolar disorder. Keith was not overly concerned by the revelation, as Molly was on medication and appeared to be fine, apart from occasional changes in her behavior when she missed a dose. These changes did not manifest as violence or outbursts, but rather as clingy behavior during arguments, such as refusing to let Keith leave. Additionally, Molly would often spend hours in the bath, followed by periods of sitting on the cold floor and crying. Despite the difficulties they faced, Keith and Molly continued their life together and decided not to have children at that time. However, Molly soon revealed that she was pregnant, which took Keith by surprise. As the sole breadwinner, Keith was struggling financially and did not feel ready to become a father. Keith eventually proposed to Molly and she happily accepted, but due to her health problems, Molly continued to take prescription medication, including antidepressants, sometimes up to 16 pills a day. This caused Keith to worry about the effects of the medication on their unborn child. In a tragic turn of events, Molly had a dream that she had lost her baby, and the next day the hospital confirmed that the fetus had died. The loss put further strain on their relationship. Molly fell into a state of grief and was diagnosed with major depression. Her parents began to view Keith negatively, seeing him as the cause of Molly's problems. Molly planned to leave Keith in the United States to find work as a nanny for the family in Europe. In March 2008, she packed her things and moved out of the apartment they were sharing. 10 days later, she called Keith, telling him that she was in Ireland, had found a job, and was doing well. This was the last time they spoke. Years later, in October 2015, Keith received an email from a police officer in North Carolina revealing that Molly had kept her relationship with Keith and her move to Europe a secret. The email informed Keith that Molly's new husband, Jason Corbett, had been murdered. When Keith watched an interview with Molly and her father, Tom, they described Jason as a cruel person, but Keith did not believe their story. He thought their feelings seemed fake. In January 2016, Tom and Molly were charged with second-degree murder in Jason's death. At their trial in July 2017, Tom and Molly claimed they had acted in self-defense when they killed Jason. Tom said he had tried everything he could to keep himself and Molly safe. Tom admitted to beating Jason with a baseball bat, only stopping when he was sure Jason was no longer a threat. However, the prosecution argued that the severity of the attack showed a deep hatred for Jason rather than self-defense. Analysis of the bloodstains showed that some of the blows were delivered when Jason's head was between 30 and 50 centimeters above the ground, suggesting that Tom continued to attack even after Jason was no longer a threat. The presence of stains on Molly's nightgown near the area where Jason was struck suggests that she was nearby during the attack. During the trial, Lieutenant Frank Young testified about the injuries he observed on Tom and Molly on the night of the incident. He stated that Molly had self-inflicted wounds to her neck, telling her to stop while he was taking notes on her injuries. Other than some dried blood on her face and hair, Lieutenant Young found no other injuries on Molly. Tom also had no injuries, only blood on his watch and under his fingernails. Notably, his glasses were not broken. Paramedic Amanda Hackworth also took the stand and described what she found when she arrived at the scene. When she examined Jason's body, she found that his torso was cold to the touch and had patches of dried blood. This contradicts Molly's statement that they called 911 immediately after Jason became unconscious. The police investigation discovered that Jason had a life insurance policy, with Molly listed as the beneficiary. Furthermore, it was revealed that Jason had financially supported Molly's parents. A neighbor of Jason's family testified at the trial. He recalled spending an evening with Jason from 3:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., drinking beer together. According to the neighbor, Jason seemed very relaxed at the time. The neighbor also witnessed Tom and his wife arriving at Jason's house and noted that Jason warmly welcomed them and helped them carry heavy luggage into the house. After 9 days of witness testimony, listening to arguments, and viewing haunting crime scene photos, the jury reached a verdict within 3 hours. The court found Molly Corbett and her father, Tom Martins, guilty of second-degree murder. Molly was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while her father was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As the verdict was read, Molly turned to her mother, expressing remorse. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jennifer Schuett. Jennifer Schuett is an 8-year-old girl who has just completed elementary school. She lives with her single mother, Elaine, who has worked hard to provide her daughter with a comfortable life. Elaine always tries to give Jennifer a happy childhood, full of love and care. Thanks to that, Jennifer has become a cheerful, active girl who loves to explore and learn. However, Jennifer still has a common fear in children, which is the fear of the dark. Therefore, she often sleeps in the same room as her mother. Elaine understands this fear and is always by her daughter's side. On the night of August 9, 2009, mother and daughter slept in the same room again. But Jennifer did not sleep well, constantly turning and lightly kicking her mother, making it difficult for Elaine to sleep. Elaine woke up at 2:30 a.m. and suggested Jennifer sleep in her own room so she could rest before the new workday. But Jennifer replied convincingly, "Mom, I'm going to sleep in my own room tonight because I love you," and she went to her own room to sleep for the rest of the night. Elaine regretted the decision for a long time, but at the time, she couldn't have known what would happen next. The next morning, Elaine went to wake Jennifer but found her missing. She found the window facing the parking lot wide open. Elaine quickly called 911. When the police arrived, she said she hadn't heard any noise or screaming after Jennifer went back to her room to sleep alone. Their apartment was on the first floor, and the window in Jennifer's room looked out onto the parking lot, causing Elaine to fear that someone might have seen Jennifer and entered the room through the window. Elaine realized that their apartment wasn't the ideal place for her and her little girl to live, but it was the best they could afford at the time. However, Elaine's parents decided to help her and her daughter find a new place to live. They bought a small house nearby and renovated it. Jennifer and her mother planned to move there in a few months, and they were there the day before Jennifer went missing. After her daughter went missing, Elaine was extremely sad and remorseful. She said that Jennifer was all she had and prayed that she could return. The police worked tirelessly to find Jennifer. Fortunately, Elaine did not have to wait long for news. Around 6:30 p.m. that same day, the police received a call from parents whose children were playing in the fields and accidentally discovered a little girl. When they arrived at the scene, the police found 8-year-old Jennifer Schuett lying in the middle of a field, 5 kilometers from her home. Jennifer's condition was serious, with a cut on her throat from ear to ear, causing her to lose a lot of blood and turn pale. Jennifer was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where doctors tried to save her life. Due to the injury to her neck, Jennifer was unable to speak. After surgery, Jennifer's condition stabilized, the bleeding stopped, and her breathing was steady. However, when Jennifer woke up from surgery, her mental state changed dramatically. She began to fear all men, including male doctors, making it difficult for her to recover. During this time, Jennifer was constantly panicking and even reacted defensively when male doctors tried to approach her. Elaine tried to explain to her daughter that everyone around her wanted to help and care for her. However, Jennifer did not trust anyone. Her behavior was understandable when she finally revealed what happened to her that night. The challenge was to gently get the information out of her. Now, considering she was only 8 years old, this was really difficult. Jennifer was too scared to speak directly to the investigators, so the detectives gave her a notebook and pen to write down her answers to their questions. Because she was afraid of men, Jennifer wrote a letter to her mother, who then forwarded it to the police. Although she was only 8 years old, Jennifer's written responses were surprisingly detailed and accurate. Jennifer explained that she went into her room, turned on the lights, and began reading a book to help her fall asleep. She eventually fell asleep but was then awakened by a stranger who carried her out of the house. The stranger ran down the sidewalk with Jennifer in his arms. As soon as Jennifer realized what was happening, she tried to scream, but the stranger covered her nose and mouth. The stranger then put Jennifer in his car and identified himself as an undercover police officer. However, Jennifer's instincts told her that something was wrong. She looked around and saw her mother's car in the parking lot, which made her even more confused about where they were going and why. Jennifer had been taught that the police were trustworthy, but she had also been warned not to trust strangers. Her fear and recent experiences with strangers made her suspicious of the stranger's words, and she sensed that something was wrong. Jennifer asked the stranger to drop her off at her grandparents' house. But he refused, saying that they were not home. However, she noticed that her grandparents' car was in the driveway, which suggested that he was lying. The man stopped near Jennifer's school, about 3 kilometers from her house. He told her to watch the moon closely and said that her mother would come when the moon changed color. Jennifer waited anxiously for her mother to pick her up, but her mother never showed up. She suspected that the man was preparing for his true intentions. After 5 minutes, the stranger announced that her mother would not be coming and that they needed to drive further. They stopped at a dead-end street, where Jennifer asked the stranger to prove that he was a real police officer. She questioned him, asking where his gun and badge were. When he said that his gun was in the back seat, Jennifer turned around to look for it. That was when the stranger removed her underwear. Jennifer then lost consciousness, so she was not sure how long she was under his control. Jennifer slowly regained consciousness as she was dragged through a field, her ankles constantly rubbing against the road. The pain from the branches and rocks stabbed into her back, but she pretended to be dead and kept quiet, realizing that this was her chance to survive. Her attacker eventually let go of her legs and left her in the field. Jennifer heard him walk away, followed by the sound of his car door slamming and the sound of the engine driving away. When she regained consciousness, Jennifer found that she could not scream, and she was not sure why. She mustered enough strength to bring her right hand to her neck, where she discovered an open wound. Her hand was covered in blood. The exact time she had been missing is unknown, but it is believed that she had been lying in the field for between 12 and 14 hours. As the sun began to set, Jennifer saw the lights of passing cars nearby and heard the sounds of children. A dog approached her several times, seemingly trying to get its owner's attention, but no one came. Throughout her suffering, Jennifer was bitten by fire ants, which helped her stay conscious. Each time she woke up, she could not believe that she was not dead. Jennifer had accepted her fate, thinking that she would not survive. But everything changed when she heard the sounds of children nearby. Suddenly, something hit her leg. When Jennifer later regained consciousness, she found herself being reassured by a police officer who repeatedly told her, "You've been found, you'll be okay. Just stay with me." The officer's words provided comfort to Jennifer as she was loaded into the Lifeline helicopter. The aftermath was a challenging experience for 8-year-old Jennifer, who struggled to communicate due to her inability to speak. She had to write her answers down on paper to convey her story. Additionally, her fear of men made the situation even more complicated. To make her feel more comfortable, her mother stepped in to ask questions on behalf of the police, relaying Jennifer's answers to the officers waiting behind the door. What's remarkable about Jennifer's story is that, despite her ordeal, she was able to remember the stranger's name. She remembered the man telling her his name was Dennis and describing him as fat, with a possible scar on his face. Police also sought the assistance of forensic pathologist Lois Gibson. Although they could only communicate with Jennifer through gestures and notes, they were able to create an extremely detailed composite sketch of the suspect. The sketch was released in the hope of getting information from the public about the identity of the man in the drawing. Meanwhile, police continued to investigate the scene and found Jennifer's clothes about half a mile away, along with a man's clothes. Despite hopes of finding DNA on the clothes to catch the culprit, no matches were found. Jennifer gradually recovered from her injuries. Despite her young age, she showed incredible resilience. During her recovery, there was a moment when she was upset about a chocolate bar that she couldn't eat. She screamed in frustration and let out a weak sound. The doctors were amazed to see that her vocal cords, which had been nearly severed and were not expected to heal, began to miraculously recover. After a while, Jennifer was well enough to be discharged from the hospital. She returned home and went back to school, eventually finishing high school and college. After that, Jennifer decided to become a children's librarian. Even so, she never forgot what happened that night. Every day, she felt like she was chasing a criminal, and that the criminal could be anyone. Jennifer thought that it could be her new neighbor, or a stranger at the post office or the grocery store. She always felt like the person was watching her and would come back to kill her. Fortunately, Jennifer met a guy named Jonathan. For the first time in years, she was able to trust a man. They fell in love and Jennifer felt a little more secure. However, around that time, the clues to her attacker began to fade. The chances of finding him were slim. Her case was passed from investigator to investigator. But still no progress was made. 18 years after that terrible night, Jennifer received a phone call. It was a notice that Detective Tim Cromie was taking over her case and wanted to meet with her. Tim Cromie pledged to do everything he could to catch the criminal. Jennifer trusted him, and Tim Cromie told her that he would do everything in his power until the end of his career to get the answers she needed about this case. To help with the case, Tim decided to involve FBI agent Richard Renison in the investigation. Richard had worked for the Dickinson, Texas police before joining the FBI. Tim and Richard discovered a large amount of evidence collected on the day Jennifer went missing and shortly after she was found. Jennifer's underwear, shirt, and other items belonging to the perpetrator were particularly important, so they sent a sample of the DNA found on the clothing to Quantico, Virginia. Although the detectives knew that technology had advanced significantly in the 19 years since the crime, they understood that the age of the case could cause the evidence to not be prioritized in the lab. Despite the years, their work finally paid off. The man whose DNA was found at the crime scene was Dennis Earl Bradford, the man Jennifer had described years earlier. The 8-year-old Jennifer had described the man with astonishing accuracy, even though she was on pain medication at the time and unable to speak. Dennis Bradford, 39, lived in North Little Rock, Arkansas. His DNA was entered into the national database after an attack on a woman he met at a bar in 1996. Although he was sentenced to 12 years in prison, he only served 4. Dennis was released on parole on February 4, 2000. Less than a year later, police arrested Bradford for drunk driving less than half a mile from his home. He later remarried and worked as a welder until his arrest in 2009. Investigators Tim Cromie and Richard Renison found a lot of information about Dennis. In 1987, Dennis had been arrested in Dickinson, 3 years before the attack on Jennifer. The investigators discovered that he had 2 addresses within 2 miles of Jennifer's residence, and Jennifer was able to confirm his identity as the kidnapper. They then requested a photo of Dennis's driver's license from when he was 19. Upon seeing the photo, they were shocked because the man looked very similar to the sketch created based on Jennifer's description at age 8. On October 19, 2009, Dennis Cyril Bradford was arrested. However, he claimed that he did not remember why he stopped near Jennifer's residence or why he had mistreated her. Dennis also revealed a detail that investigators did not know. After the attack, he felt so overwhelmed by guilt that he attempted suicide with a handgun. Despite reaching for the gun, Dennis was ultimately unable to pull the trigger and decided to seek psychiatric help. During his stay at the psychiatric hospital, Dennis accidentally visited the hospital where Jennifer was still a patient, and he was very close to her at the time. Immediately after the interview, the detectives informed Jennifer of Dennis Bradford's arrest. She expressed gratitude to the detectives, especially Detective Tim Cromie and Agent Richard Renison, for their efforts and their promise not to drop the case. She also admitted that she looked forward to facing Dennis Bradford in court because he was willing to plead guilty and not drag out the trial. Jennifer was given the opportunity to choose a court date, and she chose August 10, the 20th anniversary of the attack. A turning point in the case came on May 10, 2010, a few months before the trial, when Dennis hanged himself in his cell. Jennifer faced another challenge in her life due to the trauma Dennis caused. She almost lost the ability to conceive. Fortunately, Dr. Craig Witz, after hearing Jennifer's story, generously offered her his services for free twice in late 2012. As a happy ending, Jennifer and her husband eventually welcomed their daughter Jenna and then their son Jonah. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Wilma Anderson. Wilma Anderson is the daughter of Linda and Marcus Anderson. Her parents' divorce later left difficulties in the family, making Wilma's living situation unstable. Although she could not live with both parents, her mother was always interested in her life. Wilma lived with her older sister Emily. Wilma is an active and ambitious girl. She likes to share her life on social networks, often posting photos on Facebook. Wilma loves being in front of the camera, showing her creativity and cheerful personality. Wilma met Tishko Ahmed Shabazz in Sweden when she was 15 years old. At that time, Tishko was 20 years old. Because the age of sexual consent in Sweden is 15, their relationship did not cause any legal problems. Although initially apprehensive about the 5-year age gap, Wilma's mother trusted her daughter's decision and eventually accepted Tishko. Tishko was originally from Iraq but moved to Sweden with his family when he was 8 years old. Tishko lived with his father and stepmother. During his school years, Tishko faced bullying, but as he grew older, he developed a strong determination to overcome any challenges he faced. In 2014, Tishko became a Swedish citizen, and after completing his studies in 2018, Tishko found a job in the care industry. Wilma and Tishko moved in together in Uddevalla, Sweden. Over time, Tishko became increasingly controlling, and Wilma's mother noticed a change in her daughter's behavior during the 2 years Wilma lived with Tishko. Wilma often confided in her sister Emily about her difficult relationship with Tishko. On November 14, 2019, Wilma told Emily over the phone that she was ending her relationship with Tishko. She was exhausted by Tishko's control over every aspect of her life, including what she wore, where she went, who she talked to, and how she applied her makeup. Feeling suffocated and desperate to end the relationship, she said she had to pack up and leave before Tishko got home from work. Emily tried to contact Wilma, but her calls went unanswered. The next day, November 15th, Wilma missed her dentist appointment. 2 days later, November 17th, Wilma's parents came to the apartment she shared with Tishko. After several knocks, Tishko opened the door, apparently intoxicated. Wilma's mother, Linda, asked Tishko about Wilma's whereabouts. He admitted that their relationship was over and that Wilma had left after taking her things. Tishko claimed that he did not know where Wilma was. Wilma's parents entered the apartment, hoping to find out more. Tishko recounted the argument that led to the breakup, with him and Wilma having a heated argument when he returned home from work around 5:30 p.m. Initially, her parents were not too concerned, as Tishko and Wilma's relationship was unstable. Emily, extremely concerned about Wilma's disappearance, created a Facebook post seeking information about Wilma. Normally, Wilma always contacted her family, so the lack of contact was very unusual. In the post, Emily described Wilma's appearance as 165 centimeters tall with black hair. After the posts were posted on social media, the police got involved. They interviewed Emily and other family members and began searching for anyone who may have come into contact with Wilma. However, neither Linda nor Emily had heard from her since her disappearance. With an extensive search effort underway, a combined task force of police, friends, and family set out to track Wilma using dogs and drone technology. When police approached Tishko for questioning, he claimed to have no knowledge of Wilma's disappearance or whereabouts, confirming that he had had no recent contact with her. By November 17th, 3 days into the search for Wilma, there were still no leads. Wilma was normally active on social media, but she had been strangely quiet during the time she was missing. As a result, some 5,000 people joined the search effort, and police returned to Tishko to gather more information. However, Tishko insisted that he knew nothing about Wilma's disappearance. Tishko claimed that Wilma had moved on to another man after they broke up, but there was no evidence to support this claim. Wilma's friends and family were left deeply concerned about her disappearance. Meanwhile, Wilma's family shared disturbing details with police about how Wilma's life had changed for the worse since living with Tishko. According to Wilma's family, Tishko controlled Wilma's life. Her sister, Emily, revealed that Wilma confessed that she was abused while living with Tishko. But despite this abuse, Wilma still had strong feelings for Tishko. Tishko took extreme measures to monitor Wilma's activities, including installing a GPS device on her phone. This allowed him to constantly track her location. A series of text messages between the two revealed Tishko's controlling behavior. The police thoroughly investigated Tishko's alibi. He claimed that after arriving home from work at 5 p.m., he did not leave his apartment. To verify Tishko's story, police tracked the GPS on Tishko's phone. Police found CCTV footage showing Tishko at a supermarket around 2:30 p.m. on the day Wilma went missing. He then returned home from work at 5 p.m. Neighbors reported a loud argument between Tishko and Wilma, and arguments were common between them. A loud argument between the Wilma and Tishko occurred around 6 p.m. This prompted a concerned neighbor to check on them. As the neighbor approached the apartment door, they noticed an eerie silence. The sudden quiet was unsettling, but the neighbor, unsure of what to do next, returned to their own apartment. The police thoroughly investigated Tishko's activities, including his workplace and company vehicle. They requested forensic testing on the vehicle and reviewed the GPS data, which revealed his movements from Thursday the 14th to Monday the 18th. According to the GPS log, Tishko had visited clients and returned to his residence during his regular work hours on those days. On the evening of the argument, around 6:30 p.m., Tishko left his apartment. Witnesses saw him walking alone along the freeway, wearing all black clothing. A motorcyclist described Tishko as appearing lost in thought. Police stopped Tishko and escorted him home. When questioned, Tishko said he initially intended to catch a train but decided to walk home instead. However, the police did not file an official report on the incident. Later, on November 19, 2019, Tishko was arrested. He had obvious scratches on his wrists. A search of Tishko's apartment revealed clues such as Wilma's belongings, including a handbag, jacket, shoes, and eyeglasses. Wilma's mother, Linda, insisted that her daughter would always carry her bag, adding to the mystery. Forensic experts tested the scene with Blue Star, a sophisticated version of luminol, and found a trail of blood. Every room had blood on the walls and floors, suggesting a violent struggle had taken place throughout the apartment. The bed had a gruesome stain, a torso-shaped mark that was visible under the glow of Blue Star. The discovery of muscle tissue on a knife and on the living room wall added to the horrific scene. The large amount of blood found made it seem unlikely that anyone could have survived. The search continued outside the apartment, where trash bags were found containing Tishko's bedding with incriminating blood stains. Confronted at the police station, Tishko was shown the evidence against him. However, he strongly denied any involvement, claiming he would have known if someone had been seriously hurt in his home. At the same time, more and more people were joining the search for Wilma every day. The apartment where Wilma was last seen has now been turned into a crime scene, but all attempts to contact Wilma have been unsuccessful. 2 weeks after Wilma went missing, on November 28, police brought in sniffer dogs to assist in the search. These trained dogs are experts at detecting the scent of dead bodies. When they entered the bedroom, one of the dogs quickly indicated that it had found something, a sign that there was likely a dead person or human remains in the area. A strong, unpleasant stench filled the apartment, making the already gloomy atmosphere even more oppressive. The police had searched the place before, but this time they carefully searched the bedroom, paying special attention to the area the dogs had marked. They focused on a wardrobe, which at first glance looked like another piece of furniture. However, inside this ordinary-looking wardrobe was a small travel suitcase. When they opened the suitcase, the police found a large object wrapped in aluminum kitchen foil. When they carefully removed the foil, they witnessed a horrifying sight with blood stains on the foil. Wilma's head had been severed, wrapped, and secured with tape. The travel case, which held the gruesome evidence of Wilma's fate, was sent to the forensic labs in Gothenburg for further analysis. A detailed examination uncovered Tishko's fingerprints. The investigation revealed the shocking conclusion of the case. Although the exact cause of Wilma's death could not be confirmed, investigators found severe injuries to her head and eyes consistent with blunt force trauma. The violent nature of the decapitation made it difficult to assess the full extent of Wilma's head injuries. Wilma's family was devastated by the news of Wilma's tragic fate. Wilma's mother Linda joined the efforts to find the rest of Wilma's body. The family was forced to confront the horrific details of the crime, which were slowly emerging from the evidence found in Tishko's apartment. A harrowing picture began to emerge. Wilma's final moments may have taken place in the living room, where she was brutally attacked, suffering a fatal blow to the head. Swedish police recorded Tishko's denial of involvement in Wilma's murder, in which he maintained his innocence. His statement revealed a distorted perception of love, as he said, "You forget that this is a girl he loved and that he lived his whole life for. If he killed her, he wouldn't be able to keep her head." Despite this, law enforcement gathered enough evidence to charge Tishko, and his trial was scheduled for May 2020. Throughout the trial, Wilma's body remained missing. Tishko showed no signs of remorse or emotion. In court, his defense team tried to argue that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, pointing to his irrational beliefs and claims about Wilma as evidence. However, this defense was unsuccessful. On July 27, 2020, the court delivered its verdict. Tishko, 23, was found guilty of murdering 17-year-old Wilma Anderson and was initially sentenced to life in prison. However, the appeals court later reduced his sentence to 18 years. The sentence was reduced in part due to a lack of concrete evidence surrounding the circumstances of Wilma's death, including the fact that her body was never found. Wilma's funeral was finally held in late 2020, bringing closure to the tragic events, but undoubtedly causing immense grief for her family. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Linda Sladen. Linda Patterson Sladen was born on March 8, 1950. At 16, she became pregnant with her first son, Jeff, and 3 years later, her second son, Tim. To build a stable family, she convinced her boyfriend, Frank Sladen, to marry her. Unfortunately, the marriage turned out to be disastrous. Frank's alcoholism addiction led to routine abuse of Linda and their sons. Jeff and Tim remember their father's violent behavior, which was triggered by his drinking. The abuse was so severe that Linda considered divorce, and in 1974, she finally escaped the toxic marriage. After 9 tumultuous years, Linda divorced Frank and started a new life as a single mother to her 2 teenage sons. Despite financial struggles and limited resources, she worked hard to provide for her family and be a caring presence in her sons' lives. Without a car, Jeff and Tim often walked to school or relied on others for rides. Jeff and Tim loved playing football, but they didn't have a ride to practice, so their coach, Coach Joseph, would often give them a lift to and from their home. Around the same time, Linda was preparing her home for her mother's visit. She wanted her mother to move in, hoping her presence would help tidy up the house and make it feel more welcoming. Linda's sister Judy would often visit her, and they would spend their time chatting over coffee. However, on September 4, 1981, Judy arrived at Linda's apartment around 8:30 a.m. to find something shocking. The night before, on September 3, 1981, Jeff had come home from football practice to find no food, so he went to his grandparents' place. He returned home around 9:30 p.m. to find the house empty. Later, around 11:30 p.m., Linda and her younger son Tim came home. Linda had been at a neighbor's place playing cards, and before that, she had done some household chores. Jeff saw his mom doing the dishes, while Tim went to bed. Jeff apologized to his mom for their earlier argument, and they made up before Linda said goodnight to her boys. Jeff's last words to his mother were, "I love you, Mom, I'll see you tomorrow," but tragically, that would be the last conversation they would ever have. On September 4, 1981, at around 8:30 a.m., Judy visited Linda's apartment. When she knocked on Linda's bedroom door, there was no response. This was unusual, as Linda typically woke up before the boys left for school. Judy thought maybe Linda was still asleep, but as she turned to leave, she noticed something odd. The window in Linda's room was open, and the sheet that usually covered it was missing. Judy's concern grew, and she knocked on the door again. This time, she opened it and was met with a horrific sight: Linda's lifeless body on the floor, a wire clothes hanger wrapped around her neck. Linda was partially undressed, and her cupboard was wide open, but there were no signs of a struggle. Everything else in the room was in its usual place. Judy's scream alerted a nearby caretaker, who immediately called 911. Within minutes, the police, news reporters, and medical services arrived at the scene. The area was quickly cordoned off. Tim and Jeff were abruptly awakened by police officers, who then asked them to leave their home, which had become a crime scene. Jeff managed to avoid seeing his lifeless mother by passing by her room quickly, but Tim caught a glimpse of her for the last time. The two boys were subsequently sent to live with their grandparents while the investigation continued. Tragically, their mother, Linda, had been murdered at the age of 31. As soon as the boys had left, Sergeant Edgar Pickett of the Lakeland Police Department arrived at the crime scene to take charge of the case. He played a crucial role in the investigation and discovered vital evidence. Upon beginning his examination of the scene, Sergeant Pickett found several fingerprints in Linda's bedroom. While most belonged to the victim, one print did not match Linda's appeared. A palm print was discovered on the windowsill of Linda Slayton's bedroom, the same window that was missing a sheet, sparking an investigation into her death. An autopsy revealed multiple bruises and marks on her arms, shoulders, and neck, and her partially naked body suggested possible sexual assault. The autopsy results confirmed that Linda was brutally beaten, sexually assaulted, and then strangled to death with a metal clothes hanger from her own closet. The palm print found on the windowsill was a crucial piece of evidence, but unfortunately, forensic DNA analysis was not available at the time. As a result, the police had to explore Linda's family tree to identify potential suspects. The primary suspect was Frank Slayton, Linda's ex-husband, who had a history of aggression and abuse. In 1975, during their divorce, Linda described Frank as having an aggressive nature and being neglectful of his family. He was brought in for questioning, but an alibi checked out, placing him at home in Alabama on the night of Linda's murder. The police also had other individuals in mind. One of them was Jeff Slayton, Linda's son. The reason for this was a heated argument between Jeff and his mother that occurred before her murder. As the eldest son, Jeff had a complex relationship with his mother, having grown up in a household with an abusive father and later a single mother. Although Jeff and his mother frequently argued, they always managed to make amends. On the night of the murder, Jeff had made up with his mother before going to bed. When questioned by the police, Jeff passed 2 polygraph tests, which led to his name being cleared from the list of suspects. By September 2001, the police were struggling to find new leads in the case, nearly a year after the murder. However, things took a turn when they received information about a 24-year-old man who was reportedly involved in a similar crime, reigniting their investigation. Jimmy Ulmer was a suspect in Linda's murder case due to a previous crime where he attempted to abduct a 10-year-old girl through her bedroom window. A police check revealed that Ulmer had received an 80-year prison sentence, and his crimes bore a striking resemblance to Linda's case. Furthermore, Ulmer had been living in the same apartment complex as Linda at the time of the murder. The evidence against him made Ulmer the prime suspect, but he died during the investigation, making a DNA match impossible without exhuming his body. Fortunately, Ulmer's mother allowed the authorities to collect a DNA sample from him, but the results did not match. With Ulmer ruled out, the investigation turned to other potential suspects, but no one was ever charged. Despite looking into other leads, the case eventually went cold. The Slayton brothers, Linda's children, were now left to cope with the loss of their mother, relying solely on their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris, for support. After Linda passed away, her family held a funeral and gradually returned to their normal routines. Her sons went back to school, and as time went by, they began to heal and move on from what had happened. Tim eventually started playing football again, and he found comfort in the support of his teammates and coach Joseph, who would often give him rides to and from practice. Tim put up a photo of his team in his bedroom, which became a source of motivation for him to keep moving forward and overcome his challenges. After their mother's death, the young Slayton brothers grew into men who built loving families of their own. Jeff got married and had 2 children, while Tim also started a family. As the years passed, both brothers regularly checked in with the Lakeland investigators to see if there were any updates on their mother's case. By 1998, Sergeant Edgar Pickett had left the case, and a new investigation team took over. Detective Brad Grace was assigned to the Slayton case and began reviewing the evidence. He discovered unidentified DNA from the 1981 crime scene and sent it to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's Major Crime Lab for analysis. By 1999, the lab had successfully developed a full DNA profile of the killer. In 2001, Detective Grace reviewed the list of suspects in the Slayton case, determined to collect DNA samples from each one. He arranged a meeting with the Slayton brothers and collected their DNA samples, which were sent for further testing. However, the results revealed no match with the DNA profile of the suspected murderer. After clearing Jeff's name, Detective Grace turned his attention to Frank Slayton. Frank had since quit drinking and appeared to have overcome his aggressive tendencies, even reconnecting with his sons, Tim and Jeff. Frank agreed to submit his DNA for testing, but it did not match the DNA profile. Detective Grace attempted to find a match for the unidentified DNA profile by submitting it to the FBI's National DNA Database in 2005. Over the years, he eliminated dozens of suspects through DNA evidence, but he retired in 2015 after 17 years on the case. The case was then assigned to new detectives, Tommy Hathcock and Russell Hurley. Detective Tommy made a significant breakthrough in the investigation 3 years in, when they discovered that the Florida Department of Law Enforcement had developed a cutting-edge technology that could help identify unidentifiable DNA. She immediately sent the unidentified DNA from the Slayton case to a genetic genealogist, who uploaded it to a public genealogy website called GeneMatch. The website, run by Moore, produced a list of people who shared DNA with the killer. Moore then used birth certificates, marriage certificates, obituaries, and social media to build a genetic family tree. As she dug deeper, she created 3 branches of the family tree that led to a single individual who was likely responsible for Linda Slayton's murder. The DNA profile and family tree pointed to one person, Joseph Clinton Mills, also known as Coach Joseph. In a shocking twist, it turned out that Joseph was a familiar face to the Slayton family. His picture even hung on Tim's bedroom wall, with Joseph standing just above Tim's shoulder. Upon learning the killer's name, detectives Tommy and Russell began investigating Joseph Mills' background. They uncovered a history of crimes, including grand theft committed through forging a will. Although Joseph was never charged for this crime, the police had collected his palm and fingerprints. Significantly, a palm print matching Joseph was found on the windowsill at the crime scene by Sergeant Edgar Pickett. The family of the deceased might finally find closure in a cold case that had been open for over 40 years. To confirm their suspicions, investigators compared the palm prints taken from Linda Slayton's windowsill in 1981 to the suspect's palm print and found a match. However, they still needed to compare a recent DNA sample from the suspect to the DNA evidence from the Slayton case. To do this without alerting the suspect, detectives decided to obtain his DNA for testing without his knowledge. To gather evidence, investigators took garbage bags from Joseph Mills's house and searched them at the police station for items that could contain his DNA. While sorting through the trash, they found a piece of medical adhesive tape in one of the bags and sent it to the crime lab for testing. As they awaited the DNA results, the detectives looked into Joseph's private life. He was a 58-year-old married man with children and grandchildren who had spent most of his life in Kathleen, Florida, just 30 minutes from the crime scene. 2 weeks later, the crime lab results came in, revealing that the unknown DNA found at the scene matched the DNA on the medical adhesive tape. In December 2019, detectives arrested Joseph and brought him in for questioning. It was discovered that Joseph was only around 20 years old when he committed the crime in 1981. Police had spoken to him over the phone just a day after the murder, but Joseph had told investigators that he had dropped the victim off after football practice on the night of September 3, 1981, the evening before the murder. The police did not initially suspect Joseph, but he eventually became a person of interest. During questioning, Joseph claimed that Linda Slayton had invited him over for consensual sex. However, investigators thought this was a fabricated story. They suspected that Joseph had actually targeted Linda before the night of the murder, partly because he had frequently given her son, Tim, rides to and from football practice, and also because he had been seen lingering around the Slaytons' residence. According to Joseph's statement, on the night of September 3, 1981, after dropping Tim off at his house after football practice, Joseph returned to the Slaytons' residence when no one was home. He broke in through Linda's bedroom window and hid in her closet until she went to bed. Once she was asleep, Joseph emerged from the closet, beat, sexually assaulted, and ultimately strangled Linda using a wire hanger from her closet. Joseph Mills was found guilty of first-degree murder and sexual battery. During his sentencing, family members of the victim, Linda Slayton, confronted him and demanded to know why he committed the crime. However, Joseph failed to provide any explanation or apology, simply stating, "I am a good person." The judge sentenced Joseph to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although the Slayton family found some comfort in knowing that Joseph will spend the rest of his life behind bars, they were still outraged that he was able to live freely for so many years while they suffered without their mother. Tim, Linda's son, was particularly shocked by the revelation. Joseph had been a role model and coach to him, and Tim had looked up to him. However, it turned out that Joseph had been playing a sinister game. He would often ask Tim about the progress of the case, pretending to show concern, while secretly trying to gather information and avoid suspicion. Joseph would ask about new leads and news, but Tim had no idea that the killer was standing right in front of him. Even today, Tim does not believe that the person he trusted most was actually his mother's killer. In fact, he says he had the killer's picture in his home for years without ever suspecting anything. Jeff, still grieving, often wonders how life would be different if Linda were still alive. Despite the traumatic experience, Tim and Jeff have remained very close. They often visit their mother's grave together, and Jeff never fails to light a candle on the anniversary of her death.